And we're ready to start the webinar. Great. Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Working Effectively with Other Teams. I'm Dennis Barr, and we'll moderate today's session. We want your questions and comments during the webinar, so please feel free to type them into the chat box on your dashboard. We'll answer as many of your questions as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. The questions that we cannot get to, we'll answer after the webinar and share with you all in an email next week. Well, here's the star of the show is Jeff Nichols. He's HRDQ's senior instructor with a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in safety engineering and decades of managing people and processes. Jeff has a wide and deep background to draw from. Business training has been Jeff's passion for nearly all of his career. He's trained more than 30,000 people in a wide range of management and leadership topics. And he has written over 600 customized training programs for hundreds of clients, from large and small businesses to federal and state government agencies to healthcare and nonprofit organizations. Jeff, thanks for joining us today, and please take it away.
Thank you, Dennis. It's good to be here with everybody, and good morning and good afternoon with you all. This is a topic that I've really been looking forward to conducting the presentation on, because it goes beyond just let's say basic team building and gets into some pretty heavy duty stuff. So I consider this information to be at least graduate level and perhaps even up to MBA level, and I'm excited about that. So strap on your seatbelt. I think I put too much information into this thing. We're going to be going pretty quickly, but remember, you can ask a question through the chat and we'll do our best to answer it one way or another, either during the presentation or after the presentation. We'll send out an email with answers to questions. So, okay, and by the way, we'll set up a time. I've got some time budgeted for answering questions at the very end of the presentation. Let's get started by getting to know each other a little bit better, at least as a group. So if you will, now don't select a survey item yet, but let me kind of explain this. This is survey 1 on slide 4. It talks about the time spent on that is between team problems each week. Well, when I'm talking about this, it's where something's come up that is non-standard, it has to be addressed, and it is a problem, and it's not routine. So, you know, if there's routine communication, don't include that in your subjective calculations. Just include those things that are problems that are unexpected and that require you to take time to deal with them at the point that they're brought up to you. So with that in mind, we're going to conduct this survey, and I'd like for you to select A or B or C or D, whichever one of them comes closest to your thinking about the time that you spend dealing with problems between teams. Okay, we're looking pretty good. It seems to be steadying out. What do you think, Sarah? Looks like, yeah, we're at 33% for 0 to 1 hour, 44% for 1 to 3 hours per week, 13% for 3 to 5 hours, and 10% for 5+ hours. Now, of course, we don't know the circumstances, and I appreciate your taking the time to think about this, and the circumstances can make a huge difference. But when you look at the number of hours that may be involved here for you and for other people, it brings to mind one single issue to me, and that is the amount of disruption and the amount of cost involved with it. Now, we're going to be talking about selling some ideas to management a little bit later. But let's remember one thing: management is paid to do one thing, and that is to deliver financial results. Even if it's a nonprofit organization, it doesn't mean a below profit organization. Those kinds of organizations still have to deliver on financial results, and costs are important. So think about the cost that we have here as we look at 33%, 0 to 1 hour, 44%, 1 to 3 hours. That's a lot of time, and that's a lot of cost. And remember also, I'm going to come back to this a little bit later, but there are three kinds of costs. There are direct costs, which are basically out of pocket. Somebody somewhere has to write a check in order to fix whatever went wrong, or at least as a part of the fix. Or it can be indirect. So for example, if we have an accident, since I'm a safety engineer, I kind of relate to those examples. If we have an accident on an operations floor, and the person has to go to the hospital or at least go to the nurse and get patched up, then what happens is that cost may not show up as a direct cost, but if we have to do something because our workers' compensation insurance went up, that's indirect and it's still a cost. So we have these all the time, and then we have the last cost, and that's intangible costs. So it's direct, indirect, and intangible, and this has to do with the interruption to your focus. You're working on what you need to be working on for your business, your job, your department, your team, and all of a sudden you've got to take care of this little mess, and it just gets right into the middle of your consciousness. And by the time you pick it back up again, you know, you almost have to, you've lost your momentum, you have to rethink some things to figure out where you were when you got interrupted. That's a huge cost, and yet it doesn't show up on bottom lines. But I think everybody out there, if they're not agreeing, they may have a better organization that I have been a part of or I have worked with as a consultant. So think about those costs, direct, indirect, and intangible when it comes to dealing with any problem, quite frankly, non-standard issue or event, but especially between teams, because this is where we see a lot of friction in organizations that if we could just minimize it, it would make a huge difference. Okay, so let's take another survey real quickly here. And please, again, hold on responding until I've kind of described this and you know what I'm really speaking of. This is, let's see, whoops, I haven't changed this. There we go. The main issue that causes most inter-team problems. Now, of course, there are many, and this is kind of oversimplification. You can see the A through D there. But what we're really looking at is problems as a result of a break in a process. There are choke points or breakdowns that happen in a standard process. And I'll give you an example of that. For example, when I was working with a major seminar company, I can give you its name now, it's been bought out. Name of it at that time back in the 80s and 90s was Paget Thompson. What we did was send out millions of brochures inviting people to come to our seminars, and they were all on paper. At that time, we did not have email, and it was not used, or internet, not used for any type of marketing device. But at any rate, I'm sure that some of you are still getting those from other companies. And one problem came up, and that was that we had a seminar for administrative assistants. And the idea was how we can make you more efficient, more effective, and help you get better promotions if you're more effective in doing your job. And one of the bullet points on the front of of a brochure that we sent out seemed to drag people in droves. And that bullet point, I still remember it well, was 7 ways to file and never leave your desk. All right, now that, a lot of people want to know those 7 ways. There was just one problem. Nobody at Paget Thompson knew what those 7 ways were. That was brought up because of marketing people who were what's called sub-optimizing, doing everything they can to succeed at the highest level, regardless of the impact on other teams, and regardless, really long-term, of the impact on the company. And of course, I was unhappy because I was in charge of the trainers who had to deliver the program, and the lady who was in charge of program development was unhappy because they weren't really consulted, and marketing said, deal with it. Basically, the VP of marketing told me, he said, my job is to get fannies in the seats. What you do with them after that is your problem. Now that's a classic case of sub-optimization. And we're going to talk about what we did to overcome that, because here was the structure of how we operated was really the problem, not his attitude, although I didn't appreciate it. But the fact was he was bonused based on numbers, the number of people who attended. And so we'll call that a quantity factor. I was bonused on the basis of quality, meaning were people happy, and if they were so unhappy, did they ask for their money back? That was the main thing that we looked at. So we have not opposed goals, but we certainly had goals that were not in sync with each other. And that's one of the issues that we want to look at, and I'm going to bring up this term again, again, and it's called sub-optimization of the parts. That is, each of the sub-level departments or teams do what they can to achieve their goals and not really care about what it does to other departments. So that's one of the big issues that we're going to talk about and talk about how to overcome. Okay, so let's take a look at a flowchart of communication. And this came out of an MIT study done back in 2009. Bottom line, what it says is that those teams that communicate more successfully are more effective and more productive. Now, I don't like reading too much, but I got this article that was actually published, even though the study was done in 2009. The article was published in April 2012 in the Harvard Business Review. And I'll repeat that at the end of this so that in case you feel like it's worthy enough for your attention, you can go look for it. All right, now the author of the article is a man named Alex Pentland. He was in charge of the MIT Human Dynamics Laboratory. And what he said was, we equipped all the members of those teams with electronic badges that collected data on their individual communication behavior, tone of voice, body language, whom they talked to, how much, and more. With remarkable consistency, the data confirmed that communication indeed plays a critical role in building successful teams. In fact, we found patterns of communication to be the most important predictor of a team's success. So what's being suggested here in these diagrams is that the team on the left has strong communication between a few members, but not all. Now, the team on the right has strong communication with virtually all members. Maybe one member doesn't have as strong a communication between other team members, but overall they have stronger communication because they have more of it. Now, I added some other dotted lines. You can see that one at the top, the one from the team leader at the top of the right-hand diagram to the team leader over at, excuse me, not the team leader, but another person over in the left-hand side. And then you can see that I've given you a red arrow for communication between the two team leaders. So this is the beginning of healthy inter-team or between-team communication. Now, with just a little bit, what we're going to talk about is something that author Stanley McChrystal, who was General McChrystal, brought up in his book called The Team of Teams. And what he talked about was getting a lot more communication. So I've added some blue arrows here. And the idea here is that we don't just communicate more within our teams. We don't just communicate more with other teams. We communicate with everybody who has a stake in the outcome and who has a commitment and shared purpose with our organization and our teams. Now, this is not such a new concept. It's been around a long time. In fact, the development of the atom bomb and the Manhattan Project during World War II back in 43, 44, and 45, that was very collaborative, and it had a lot of communication between three main sites. NASA, in the building of its rockets, was, I think, unfortunately, we saw that a couple of times when things went wrong spectacularly, and unfortunately, people died. Now, what NASA did in response to that was to get vendors involved and get contractors involved so that they could get everybody's view involved on the critical areas that they had identified. And that's going to be the issue for us is, how can we identify critical areas of communication so that we make sure that everybody gets the information they need in order to, if you'll pardon my minimizing the example I just gave, knowing what the difference is between 7 ways to file and never leave your desk and what can be very critical in some organizations because of life and death circumstances. Okay. So this is what we're going for, but we're going to go beyond this, and I'll show you that diagram a little bit later. But this is a good, healthy flow of communication. And the question I'd ask you at this point is, how close is your organization to this kind of communication, where there's outside, inside, between teams? And let me point out that if you're not thinking about project teams, then you're missing an important and I think integral part of increasing communication within your organization and other organizations that you work with. All right, so let's take a look at how we've solved the communication problem, or at least reduce the amount of time that we're spending in working with other teams and not sub-optimizing. Yes, we want to succeed, but not at the expense of the organization and not at the expense of other teams. First thing we can do is use what's called SWOT analysis. Now, what we're doing here in SWOT analysis is really basic. This is a very simple tool that's extremely powerful, and it's used mainly in strategic planning. But I'd point out to you that I'm sure this is very familiar with a lot of you who use SWOT and other similar kinds of tools in your strategic planning. What I'd point out to you is that the top part of the SWOT is strengths and weaknesses, and those are focused on internal things. For example, do we have the workforce we need to meet the demands of production that we have? If we don't, that's a weakness. If we do, it's a strength. Do we have materials coming in on a timely basis so that we can use just-in-time techniques to minimize costs? If we don't, it's a weakness. If we do, it's a strength. So you can see where I'm going with that. Do we have the management in place to support the amount of growth we expect over the next 3 to 5 years? Right now, the economy is doing extremely well, and a lot of companies are doing very well. Do we have the management group? And then again, do we have the technical or professional group that will enable us to keep growing at the rate that we have been growing? What we're seeing across the United States now, and you'll have to make your own judgment, especially in your business and in your industry, my guess is that you might be having some trouble finding good people, well qualified people who can meet the needs of the growth of your organization. So that'd be something that we could put in the weaknesses area. But one other weakness might be communication. One other weakness might be the IT software that we're using. My wife is a partner in a small CPA firm, and all CPA firms have to certify now that all of their systems their IT systems are encrypted. So, which is good news for those of you who have a CPA. That's good news. The bad news is it's extremely expensive, and it's just as hard as any other IT conversion. It takes time and a lot of mistakes and a lot of problems to get integrated. And if you're in that kind of situation, then that might be an issue for you if you have to do a lot of IT conversion. So this is all about the internal state of the strengths and weaknesses of your organization. This can be applied at an organizational level, departmental level, team level, and if you think about it, even an individual level. You could do a SWOT analysis on your own strengths in terms of education, background, knowledge, and skills. And do they seem to be a weakness? Could you do more that would help you in your career? Now, also you'll find doing a SWOT analysis that some things tend to be both a strength and a weakness. We can overplay our strengths. For example, in the case I just gave you, the example I gave you, the marketing VP, marketing was one of our strengths. It was one of the things that caused Paget Thompson to grow as well as it did, and he was responsible for that. However, it was also a weakness because it caused breakdowns, and we had a lot of money backs from people who attended our seminars because they came because of that bullet, and they wanted to find 7 ways to file and never leave their desk. And we just flat didn't have the answer. So we had to come up with an answer, and I'll share that with you here in just a little bit. The external things they're outside of the organization's walls, like the demographics of the people in your recruiting area. the education level of the demographics. It can be what other employers are like yours. How much does in tax breaks does your local area provide? All these things are things that we need to look at if we're going to really deal with the communication issues, because communication could be an opportunity because the equipment is available. We have great internet capabilities, but not everybody has one. Some people are still running on DOS, if you will, black screens with DOS rather than Windows. I know this because my wife deals with them. She doesn't tell me how, but it's like saying, well, we've got to run a cross-country race, and some people are going to be driving 2018 Teslas and Maseratis. We're going to be in a Model A Ford. That's the vast difference sometimes in the opportunities that are available for software and hardware and other things. And then there's threats, and that starts with competitors. What are competitors doing that are pushing the market? It can also be, where's the economy going? For example, do you remember the name Borders, as in booksellers? Gone. Do you remember Kmart? Almost gone. Sears on its last ropes. How about Toys R Us? Shutting down. Babies R Us? Maybe it will go to an internet environment. Now, we could go on and on. There's a lot of companies that were substantial companies with well-known retail names, and they're gone because they didn't read the market well. So what about your organization? What about your team? Is your team dealing with the opportunities? Is it trying to seize them? Or is it really cognizant of the threats to the organization and to the team itself? Okay. So with that in mind, one of the things we want to do as we're looking at these is keep asking why. It's called root cause analysis. And it's simply saying, okay, what if we said that one of our weaknesses was that we don't have the technical expertise for what we want to do with our team or our organization? We'd ask the question, why? And generally, the rule of thumb is ask it at least 5 times so that you drill down. But I'm not sure that 5 is the magic number, whether it ought to be 2 or 10. But keep asking why to the point where it doesn't make sense anymore. So we don't have the technical expertise. Why? Well, somebody might pipe up and say, well, that's because human resources doesn't recruit well enough to attract the talent we need. Oh, really? Why? And then we don't have updated job descriptions. We haven't got time to update the job descriptions, so HR isn't really sure what to. They go off of our, what to recruit for. They go off of our vocal or our oral descriptions of what we need, not off the job descriptions. And that is a weakness. So you see where I'm going with this. Don't just label it a weakness. Dig down a little bit, drill down. Now let's not blame everything on HR, although they and the accounting department and IT do tend to be the scapegoats many times. They're not always the root cause. I say that, yes, as a former HR manager. Okay. Oh, by the way, I should say, I'm going to go back. When you're looking at this, don't just do your root cause analysis and asking why for the external issues, opportunities, and threats. Do it for the internal ones too, and make sure that you do it for the positive ones as much as you do the negative ones. Strengths and opportunities as much as weaknesses and threats. Okay, now communication is the whole key. And if we're going to communicate well, we're going to have to improve it. I've never seen an organization where if I ask the question, I shouldn't say never. I have rarely, let's put it this way, seen a situation in which I asked the question of the supervisors I may have been training at that time, well, what do you think is the #1 problem for this organization and for all of the employees? I can tell you time and time again, communication. You know what, I think I skipped over having said that, I skipped over a poll. Let me see if I can get that reconstructed. There we go. Now, this just goes to show you this is not a videoed or an audio tape broadcast. I just messed up big time and talked right through this. I think it's important. I just said I thought poor communication was a problem for a lot of organizations that I work with. What about you? If you will, take a moment now and Sarah, yeah, the poll is open. Go ahead and select A, B, C, or D, just one, please. And if you have something other than A, B, or C, specify in chat. Okay, looks like we've kind of flattened out here. Well, this is interesting. 62% said A, poor communication. 18% said B, common goals. And 18% said conflict or lack of trust. And that would come under the heading of sub-optimization of the parts. All right, so your experience is different than mine. And I think in a good way. I guess I'd rather not all be poor communication, but obviously the vast majority of the problems that you all are reporting come under the heading of poor communication. Now, this is not a scientifically based poll or survey. I'm sure you understand that, but it does give us some direction. So let's look at this in more detail. At this point, I'm going to go to, if we're going to communicate better, we need to know people better. Now, what I want to do is to point out to you that this personality style at work is a really new product. I don't know if it's the newest product from HRDQ. I suspect not, but it's very new. It was published in January 2016, and I regard it as a top level personality inventory and assessment. It looks very much like others. It is a 4-quadrant approach, but I can tell you that I like it because it gives a lot of depth. It gives a lot of statistical validity, and yet it's got a lot of applicability. And another thing it does for me as a trainer, one of the things that I have been often asked when I'm using another personality inventory is this my real, what's reported here, is this my real and forever personality? I mean, does it change? Well, the personality inventories that I've used before PSAW were not structured in order to be able to answer that question. PSAW is. And what it has to do with is, the difference between what we're born with in our DNA and what we learn. And of course, our personalities are going to be made up of both avenues, not just one or the other. So what we have to be able to say is that personality is a dynamic quantity. So being able to say, well, you're only this particular quadrant, or this is your one and only personality style or driver, I should say. It's too simplistic. And PSAW gives us the depth to be able to see through that and yet not make it really complicated. So you can see here that this is created by, PSAW is based on principles from a book written by a man named William Moulton Marston back in 1928. I've got 1921 in the handouts, but I think it's actually 1928. And the title of the book is The Emotions of Normal People. Now, of course, normal we're going to have to give have to define pretty broadly because everybody's got their issues. But in general, if we're functioning well in the marketplace, in business, and with in our social contacts, family contacts, you're normal. And and I'm going to take that too. What he said is that when you overlap focus between external focus and internal focus on the vertical axis, and overlap task focus versus relationship focus, what you get is 4 different primary styles. Now, when you go a little bit further, here, let's see. You can see that actually this is what one of the items that I think sets PSAW apart, personality style at work, is that the outer ring are what are called primary motivators or drivers. So that for people with a direct personality, I know that when I have used other personality style assessments, if you're a direct personality, let's call them that, and you're in a room full of direct personalities, there's a wide range of people there who tend to respond more to a certain type of driver or motivator that is different than yours, even though you might also be a direct personality. So it's hard to distinguish necessarily what's direct from what's something else until you look at the drivers. Now, the drivers are our preferred way of acting most of the time. Now, what you see is based in the DNA. Now, there are other factors also. There's something called an influencing factor, an influencing driver that is learned in our early years up until about age 6 or 7. And not everybody has one because their experience is consistent with the particular primary style, particular quadrant, if you will, so that they haven't felt the need, or it's an unconscious thing when you're learning these things. But for a lot of us, we have actually a fourth driver. So, for example, if you looked at the direct, which is up in the upper left-hand corner, that's the primary style, and you see that it has the primary drivers of control, achievement, and challenge. You might also have one in the spirited one, primary style, in initiation or conceptualization or perhaps collaboration. And what this does is tells us why we might be a little different in some situations than we are perhaps at home when we're just talking with friends that we know and trust and love. So PSAW is one way we can go. And by the way, Dennis, help me out here. Did you have something you wanted to say about PSAW? Dennis is every bit the consultant that I am. He knows it extremely well.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. The personality style at work is a great tool for really applications that are across the board, but one of them is especially for developing teams and trying to find out the best makeup of the team. So if you're a direct style, you're one that likes to control the situation, be fairly succinct in what you say, but may not follow through with a lot of the details. And that's where this report would let you know that, and also say, here's some of the people you might want to add to your team, like the systematic who likes to work with details, or maybe a spirited who likes to do a lot of brainstorming. So there's a lot of value in the personality style at work. We just had a industrial firm from Ohio who put 124 leaders through this, and they all went back, loved it so much as they're talking about delivering it to all of their employees. Really for team development as one thing, and also as a leadership tool. So we're going to get to, I think, at the end of the webinar, is getting an opportunity to say is, hey, please send me free access to take the personality style at work.
Wow, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. That was kind of, Dennis had mentioned that to me, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't overlook that as well as the other thing I overlooked. But also, in addition to leadership and team building, it's also very good if we can identify what people's primary drivers are, maybe to some extent what their influencing driver is, so that we can communicate more in their style. Now, some people have a problem with this. They think it's mirroring, which is taught in sales. Act just like your prospect, your client. They'll like you better. Some people are challenged by that because they regard it as manipulation, and I understand that. All we're doing with PSAW, and I think with any personal assessment that's used correctly, is we're treating people as they would like to be treated. And there's nothing manipulative and nothing negative about that. So if I know I'm dealing with a direct person, I'm going to be probably more to the point than I am. I'm a systematic, by the way, more analytical kind of person. And I'd like to give you a ton of details about why I'm right. But direct people don't want all that. They just want the they go by what's called in government bluff, B-L-U-F. That means give me the bottom line up front, B-L-U-F. So that little acronym has helped me a lot in dealing more with directs, but with spiriteds, we need to be a little bit different, and with considerates, even more different. So Great tool. Give it a look, and you'll have the opportunity to get a free one and see if you think it might be useful for you. Okay, let's move on here. Principles. I told you we're going to talk about things that we can do to build more communication and trust. And what I'm going to do here is to go through some ideas that have been tried and proven to work well. And the first, remember when we looked at the two diagrams, and the left-hand diagram had poorer communication based on what was said in the MIT study. And what I would say is it wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. And what I would say to you're kind of fighting a losing battle if you have a team that you're trying to engage who can't even communicate internally very well or across its members, because it has, let's say, a dominant team leader who insists that all communication, underline all, needs to go through him or her. And then she'll make the choice, or he'll make the choice about who it's going to be passed out to and delegated to on the team. That is something that cuts down on trust, it cuts down on communication, and it increases sub-optimization really to a high degree. If we have that, that's a problem, and that's going to really cut down the possibility of being successful in increasing communication and a sense of shared trust and shared purpose. Now, the second bullet is involve key team members, keep others informed. Now, all of us who are team leaders have had a time, and in fact, it's normal to have some employees who really do a good job. They meet the requirements of the job description, and it's good to have them on the team. And then we have others who are really good. They give extra effort. They show a lot more initiative. And they're the people many times who, because of that, get dumped on. The phrase that I've heard used is positive performance punishment. You've done such a good job, Jeff, that we're going to give you more. Well, what I'd like to suggest is to try to minimize your positive performance punishment for your key team members and get them involved and ask them if they'd like to be more involved in developing inter or between team communications. And this went to the heart of what we did with the Paget Thompson example I gave you. First of all, what we did was flowchart things, and we found out that we had not just one, but several critical choke points of information between marketing and program development, the writers of our programs. We also found that program development and my group, the training group, the ones who actually went out and did the seminars, we had our own issues. But what we got down to is what we needed was a project group that included marketing, training, and program development to look at all bullets so that we didn't come up with another 7 ways to file kind of bullet and put us in jeopardy with our customers. Now, the other thing too, at the very bottom, I said this before, and let me go ahead and reiterate, is that if we don't have numbers, if we don't have meaningful numbers, whether it's profit or gross margin or inventory turns or whatever might be the key issues for our organization, the management has no reason to listen to us. We've got to speak their language, and that means costs. And remember, for every $1 of direct cost, estimates are that there are as much as $5 to $25 of indirect and intangible costs. Now, let me give you an example. When I was a human resources director, I knew who were the companies in town, and by the way, I'm based in Kansas City. I knew who were the companies that people were flowing out of because they hated them. And they were well-known companies. If I said their names, you'd hear them, you'd know them because they're not just national, but international. And the reason I knew that is because they applied at our company. So that's an intangible cost that if people know you have an organization that is not fun to work with or to work in, that's going to cost you. Not you, but it's going to cost the organization. And that's something that may be able to be found through SHRM, SHRM surveys. That's Society for Human Resource Management. And there are other kinds of organizations that can provide at least some outside looks at your own organization. but that's another seminar. Okay, let's keep moving on. Let's see here. Principles, let's go to slide 2 on this. Brainstorm solutions and test the best. I have to tell you, my favorite webinar and seminar ever is brainstorming. I had the opportunity to work with a major, this one I can't identify, but it was a major manufacturer of outside, let's say, garden tools, both, let's see, chainsaws, weed eaters, those kinds of things. And what they wanted to do, because of instructions from their head office, was to come up with some new products. And what they did, they set this up and they wanted me to kind of facilitate it. They had a cross section of their location, where their home office location, in which they had a legal secretary, somebody off the manufacturing line, a janitor, also a engineers. We had sales and marketing people. We had about 20 people in the room, and it was a cross section of their organization. And all we did was brainstorm for 2 days. We came up with 400 different new product ideas, some of which we threw away just because they were crazy. I mean, absolutely psychotic. But that's the whole point of brainstorming, is you can't get there from here without going a whole bunch of different routes. And what we did was boil it down to a top 4 that we submitted to the home office, one of which was selected and tested, and it has made them a lot of money since then. That's one of the crowning achievements I can think of, just because I had so much fun for 2 days coming up with 400 ideas that we boiled down. All right. Now, one other thing that we need to do is, oh, by the way, this is a great way to reward your positive performers. Get them involved in brainstorming, and nobody doesn't like it once they get involved with it. So it's a great way to get them involved, and not to the extent where you're excluding other performers, but when you need to reward your positive performers, your high-end performers, that's a good way. Now, a way you can reward your whole team is to reduce, if you're a team leader, reduce this business of need to know. That comes under the heading of sub-optimizing again, and nobody wants to be the one who gives away a secret. We're not talking about that, but there's this kind of attitude in many organizations of it's top down, and it's kind of, if I want your opinion, I'll give it to you. I think you've heard that phrase before. Just do your job, I'll do the thinking around here kind of attitude. What we want to do is to get as many people involved, even if it means giving them information we might not ordinarily give them. We certainly did that in the brainstorming with that outside tool manufacturer. And we're going to see why this is important in just a moment. Assign members of one team to work with another team for short periods. It can make a big difference, and it's a way of testing the concept of building greater trust between teams. So back to Paget Thompson. What did we do to fix our problem of 7 ways to file? What we did was we had a group of 3 to 4 people that involved marketing. We had at least 1 marketing person, 1 program development person, and 1 training person. Sometimes we bring in other people just to and especially we would like to have administrative assistants because they were a big part of our market. And just ask them, does this ring for you? You know, if we came up with an idea. And so they would brainstorm and they would evaluate, if you will, bullets so that we could say something like 3 ways to file and never leave your desk, but only if we could provide valid, credible, and worthwhile answers to the bullets. It did a lot for everyone. It didn't slow down the process. It didn't reduce the number of people coming into our seminars, and it really helped our money back rate. We kept the rate of people who asked for money backs much lower after this one little thing that we did. So this is kind of a project team or a temporary team that got together every now and again to review bullets and the bullets on our brochures. Okay, and celebrate success. It doesn't have to be a party. It doesn't have to be throwing a big elaborate lunch. it can be no bigger than something I learned from a company that I worked for as a consultant for a number of years. And if they hit their sales goals one month, by golly, they'd haul off and get everybody involved in a game of Plinko. All 20 of the sales reps got to play Plinko. Now, Plinko is where you have this ball, like a ping pong ball, that you let go at the top of a board that looks like a flip chart, but it has a lot of little pegs all around it so that that ball bounces around and everywhere and eventually comes out in one of 5 little cubbies. And it could be $1, $2, $3, maybe a whopping $5 prize. And if you had 20 people doing it, the worst you could have, the worst amount of expense would be $100. So we do that, and I can't tell you how excited these grown adults got about playing Plinko just to celebrate the success of having met sales goals. So find ways to do it. And by the way, brainstorm on it. Get your team together or get 2 teams together and figure it out how everybody can celebrate when we succeed together. Okay. Now, here we're looking at something called Team of Teams takeaways. What organizations face now and in the future? And this came directly out of a book titled Team of Teams. I think probably most of you, if not all of you, have heard of it. It was written by a man named General Stanley McChrystal, and what he did was to revolutionize how he ran special forces in Afghanistan and Iran when he was in charge of them back in 2003. And what he said was, we were losing. Al-Qaeda was outmaneuvering the greatest army that had ever been seen on the face of the earth, because they could adapt so quickly, because they could move in response so quickly. They could change their plans in the course of a few minutes, whereas it took sometimes hours and sometimes a couple days for the Army to do it through their normal chain of command. So basically, he came up with this. He said, these are the factors that we're facing now, and I'm going to give you a moment to read through them because I think it's self-explanatory. Now, probably because of what we're seeing is a real increase in volatility. We see that in the stock market. We see it in the business markets. We see it around the world right now. The things are as volatile as they have ever been, and they change on a daily basis almost. Uncertainty, who knows where some of this stuff is going to go. I mean, with the Russians poisoning people, and it appears on the streets of the United Kingdom, and hopefully no other places. Complexity, that means really complexity in communication through chaotic kinds of conditions. And ambiguity. We don't really know. It's a moving target, and the target's pretty fuzzy to start with. And it's not unlike what the special operations people were dealing with in Afghanistan and Iran. And things began to turn around when General McChrystal introduced a team of teams approach. Okay, now I brought this back to you because you've seen this before. I wanted you to kind of prepare your eyes for the next diagrams, because they may give you an instant migraine. So be careful as you may want to squint your eyes on this. Here we go. Team of teams. We go from a command structure, a top-down traditional structure, to a command of teams where teams operate independently but still within a more rigid superstructure, to a team of teams in which the teams resemble each other, and everybody has a shared purpose and shared goals, so they don't need so much top-down direction. Now, I think that probably these kinds of, the one at the bottom, team of teams, may be very difficult for some organizations to actually adapt. As a consultant myself, I would want to take the steps through using project teams, because I think those are a great way to kind of slip into the concept of cross-functional teams a little more easily. And most companies have used project management, so they get it. And then try to move from the command structure to the command of team structure, and then end up somewhere between the command of teams there in the upper right-hand corner and the team of team structure. It all depends on the culture, and it all depends on the willingness, quite honestly, and the desire of upper management to make this kind of change. This is something that's very hard to do from the from the bottom up. And by the way, if you look at the bottom, I got this off the internet from a guy named Bo Gordon, Executive Vice President of Product for Airbnb. He refers to himself as a storyteller, an investor, and an all-around curious person. He gave a great synopsis of Team of Teams, and it really helped me. I read the book probably a year ago, and this is easy for me to get up to speed by using executive summaries and these kinds of things. So that's what it looks like in action. How close can you come to the Team of Teams? And the more closer you come, the better you were able to do with volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. All right. There's a lot more that can be said, and I would love to say, but we're running close on time, and I did promise that I would allow time for questions and answers. If you have those now, you can begin writing them in chat and sending them to us. Dennis will be kind of sorting those. No, excuse me, I forget whether it's, yeah, yep. Dennis will be sorting those out. Let me kind of give you a synopsis here of the resources. I got to tell you, I do regard this as MBA level, or at least master's level. All of the books and articles are not easy, but they're not that complicated. But they're not stuff that you can skim and think, well, I've got this. The Fifth Discipline by a man named Peter Senyi is older. It's 1990s vintage, but it's still one of the best systems approach books I've ever read. And it talks about, if you could, with the organization you're in, assuming that it was in one building, which I know for a lot of you that's not true, but whatever building you're in, and you have different teams in that building, if you could just, for a few minutes or hours, lift off the roof of the building so that you could actually witness how communication is done, where people go, who they're calling, who they're talking with, where the presentations are being made, and you'll be able to see a system, a live system. That can be done by flip charts and markers, but it's an interesting visual for me to think about. What if we could see our system in the process as an organic thing? It would tell us a lot. Cross-functional teams, working with allies, enemies, and other strangers. I love the title. That's one of the reasons why I put it here. But it's also got a lot of not just down to earth, but also some good thinking with an eye on systems and an eye on between team communication. Team of Teams I've already talked to you about. Stanley McChrystal, by the way, he's got a dynamite TED Talk, and I really recommend that every single one of you look this up and get it. It is on TED, and just put in Stanley McChrystal, or I think the title of it is Listen, Learn, Then Lead. And what it does is give the rudiments of what eventually became his Team of Teams approach. He's an engaging speaker, and he comes across not just as a squared away military general. He was a brigadier general in the Army, but also as a human who had to deal with very human things, both on the battlefield and after his time in the Army. So I want to give that to you. And then I love this book, and I love the title, Inevitable Surprises, Thinking Ahead in a Time of Turbulence. When you think about it, a lot of the things that happen in our organizations could have been prevented or at least minimized. And that's why I put in the SWOT analysis, because I think it can reduce those inevitable surprises. Personality style at work we've already looked at. HRDQ has got a great product that you can talk with Dennis about at your leisure, called the Team Effectiveness Profile, and it's a great way for you to see how good a team leader you really are, if you are a team leader. Okay, with that, I'm calling an end to the presentation. We have about 5 minutes left. Let me ask if, Dennis, have we gotten any questions?
Yes, we sure have, and a great resource list. I want to join your book club, Jeff. I love that list. Patricia asked a question, and I'm going to sort of put this in a little bit of a scenario. The scenario is you have independent teams, and they may have different priorities, not goals, but it's differences in task and time differences. So the goals are the same, but how do you handle that, even though you think everybody's on the same page, they all have the same goals, everything's going to work out perfectly, but you have different priorities?
Well, I think the priorities tend to morph into goals over time, and so we can call them by a different name, but in their essentials, I think they're similar, if not the same. The priorities are something that we can work with more easily because they haven't been chipped into stone as some goals are for some organizations and teams. But I would highly recommend some type of an informal joint team, project team, to talk about how do we make sure everybody's priorities are thought about by other teams, and how do we make sure that our priorities get thought about by other teams as well. I think knowing what we went through at Paget Thompson and the little scenario that I gave, if you just do that one single thing, it could well make a big difference, because it doesn't have to be this big thing where we're going to get together and hammer out all the problems. Just get together a few times, see if you can figure out what are we going to do about this. And it doesn't have to have even a team leader involved, although they probably ought to be notified that it's occurring.
Yeah. And Jeff, Sophia asked the question, I think this may get us back to your slide 15. Team of teams approach. How can you convince the benefits of this approach to the heads of the organization, especially based on the fact that it's fairly complex?
Slide 15, or let's see.
15, I think, was the team of teams slide.
Okay, yeah. Well, I
next
think.
One?
Is this
No, next one, I think. No, next one. There we go.
Okay. Well, at the risk of repeating myself, I can tell you that if you don't have numbers, you got nothing. So we got to develop numbers. We've got to do some research, some maybe secondhand research. And I shouldn't say that. I think it's called second level research. So instead of setting up a laboratory and doing assessments like they did in the MIT study, that's first level research. Second level is doing what I've done, and that is to read about first level research. Find articles, find programs in which things have been tested and shown to work, much like the MIT study that was done. So first of all, start with that, and then convert those into direct, indirect, and intangible costs, so that you don't have a situation where can't figure out why we can't get any good people in here. Well, maybe it's because we have a reputation, and here's what we found out from SHRM, that our company, the XYZ company, is kind of known as a hard place to work. Now, sometimes it means delivering bad news, and you've got to be careful about that. But do the research, develop the numbers, and present them using bluff. Bottom line, we can't support our future growth with the recruitment that we have now, and here's why. Now, if that doesn't get the attention of a senior manager, I'm not sure what will.
Well, great answer, and it gives a lot of food for thought. And also, I wanted to take, before we finalize the webinar, is thank Sarah Schaefer. You heard Jeff mention Sarah. She's sort of the glue and the wizard behind the curtain to help put this together. And we're going to have a final process or poll or slide. Sarah, if you could bring that up, of people that want to take the personality style at work at no charge.
Yep, after I close the webinar, they'll actually be prompted. It'll be like a little survey. So they can either hit yes or no. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, that sounds very convenient. Well, then we'll just sum up by, if I could say, Jeff, thank you very much for a great presentation on working effectively with other teams. And so everybody will be getting a follow-up email with the questions that we didn't get time to answer. Please visit HRDQ-store.com. We especially go to the topics button at the top and explore all the soft skills that are available. And we hope you have a lot of success and learn some valuable information here to better communicate with all of the teams within your organization. And with that, Jeff, you want to close this out?
Well, I do want to say, I hope you noticed that I'm a little bit excited about this. I think it's got so great potential for organizations and for team members. And it's the kind of thing where you can kind of test it on your own in your team by making sure that all of you communicate with each other, if not regularly, at least often. So that's what I would suggest is get started doing something and get some momentum going, and I think you'll be pleased.
Great. And that'll conclude our webinar.